Good morning. Randall said that we're running a little behind schedule, so he asked if I could speed things up a little bit and try to talk a little bit faster, and I'll try to cover my 20 or 30 minutes of the presentation in 10 or 15 minutes. That way we'll be back on schedule, be able to take our break on time. Does that work for everyone, or would you like me to slow down? Okay, I'll slow down. Okay. Thank you very much for having me here. Technology scouting has been a core part of work that I've done with organizations and myself going back to the 60s. I started in the mid-60s in the United States Air Force doing development work on what was then called McNamara's electronic battlefield. Used the GI Bill to come here and do my doctoral work with Ed Roberts and Eric von Hippel and some of the other leaders in innovation and technology management. I was on the faculty here for a short time, then in Indiana. And then I decided in the early 80s that rather than being a professor who occasionally consulted, I really was excited working with companies and would prefer to be a consultant who sometimes professed. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 40 years. And what I'd like to share with you this morning, whoops, let's go back, okay? Okay, how do we go back? I know, there we go, thank you. What I'd like to share with you is just some of the insights that I have developed over the 5 decades of helping companies sometimes set up scouting programs, often supporting those programs. Most importantly, using those programs when I help organizations or I study organizations, trying to figure out what is it that we can do to create changes in our products and services that will excite our customers, our current and our potential customers. And one of the first things that I learned here at MIT back in the 70s was that you can very rarely do it on your own. And therefore, tech scouting has never been the core of my business. Innovation has been my focus. But tech scouting has always been a critical part of that. By the way, my slides are all copyrighted. This basically says, use them any way you want. Just tell people where they came from, okay? Those of you that would like copies of the PowerPoint presentations, contact me and I'll be happy to send those to you as well. Before we get started, I want to make sure that we really understand what it is we're talking about when we're talking about scouting. Too often, I work with organizations and they think scouting is the task of going and getting something, a technology, a capability, market access. No, those are the outputs of scouting sometimes. Scouting, very simply, is collecting information. Think of military scouts. Think of the explorers that sent scouts out. They didn't decide how to frame a battle. The scouts brought back information on the environment. They brought back information on their opponent so that those that were in charge of the planning could make smarter decisions. One of the things we'll talk about before we end this, often what scouting does is not result in getting something, but realizing you don't need anything. What you've got is great. So keep this in mind. Scouting is getting information. It's not getting something. By the way, this is not new. One of my favorite old time, people have said that Edison may have invented the current modern approach to doing R&D and development. And these are 3 of my favorite quotes from him. There's a better way to do it, find it. This ties into scouting. Your idea does not have to be original, only original in its adaptation to the problem you're working on. There was a wonderful series on the BBC 20 years ago. You can still get the book. It's by James Burke called Connections. And it's showing how 10 major innovations of the 20th century were not made by someone creating something new out of whole cloth, but rather taking an innovation from here, taking an innovation from here, taking an insight from there, and putting them together and adapting them to a new area. And his last one is basically the mantra for scouting. Always keep on the lookout for new and novel ideas that others have used successfully. Over the years, I've played with different definitions. I finally have come up with a definition that I've been happy with for almost a decade. Technology scouting is an organized approach to collect information on the external technical environment that gives you insight on the options to support both tactical and strategic development needs of an organization. About 20 years ago, I was asked by Shell Research in Rijswijk in the Netherlands to help them set up their scouting effort. And it's actually the first time I did a formal academic-like research study into what are other people doing in scouting. And I looked at 25 or 30 organizations globally that were involved in scouting-type activities. Some of them had names like Chevron's Technology Watch program. The name I really liked, Monsanto's, was the Technology Prospecting program. They all had slightly different names and structures. But out of that, I discovered that there were 3 activities that most scouting operations had. The first activity was, why are we scouting? What are we looking for? And so there was approaches they had for working inside of their organization to identify the needs they had. The second is, I wonder where we might find that information. Who do we want to work with? Do we join ILP? Do we create a venture capital program? What do we do to collect that? I like to think of the scout as the knot on a bow tie. And that scout is in there creating this internal network, which is one part of the bow tie, to understand where information could have an impact. And the other part of the bow tie is the networks on the outside. And they're in the middle, making those connections between the inside. Now, the third point is really important. Most of the scouting programs that I've been involved with or observed have an activity to do deals, to license, to acquire. They have some activity that brings in a technology or a capability, but they don't always use that. And it's just that is the outcome sometimes of the decision that they make about what do we want to work on. I'm going to focus on a couple of these. First of all, we're going to look at the need. How do you figure out where technology scouting can help? And that is probably the focus of companies that I see having problems. Do not look at this broadly enough. As Randall mentioned in the introduction, they look too narrowly as all we're going to do is hunt for the technology we know. Now I'm going to deviate a little bit and be academic for a minute. And probably the most powerful model of innovation that I ran into was when I was doing my doctoral work and on the faculty here back in the 70s. And that was work that was done when a guy by the name of James Webb, they've now got a new telescope named in his honor. James Webb was tasked by President Kennedy in the United States to put a program together to put a man on Mars and return him safely to Earth. And James Webb came to MIT and said, MIT, you are a great technical source. MIT, you know more about management than almost anyone in the world. I bet you know how to manage technology and innovation. And Don Marquis, who headed the program at the time, said, sorry, no one's paid us to find out. And so NASA gave them a lot of money, and through the 60s and continuing to today with funding from other sources, MIT has been one of the primary sources of gathering insights on how organizations can effectively take technical resources and apply those to new and emerging customer needs. And out of the work that was done came seminal work in the area of how do you organize technical organizations, how do you set up entrepreneurial programs, how do you create environments in which innovation can take place. But the head of the program, Don Marquis, studied over 500 innovative projects, and he came up with a very simple model. Now, the model I'm going to present is not the one that's in his paper. If you want to see that, go to an article by Ed Roberts, which is one of the most cited articles, What Have We Learned About Managing R&D? It has feedback loops, and it's complicated. I just took the core elements because I find it's easier to explain to people what the elements of innovation are by just looking at the pieces of the elements. And his insight was, innovation starts with information. Information on what are your current customers and potential customers doing now, and what needs might they have in the future. It also starts with information on technology. Ralph Cates and I teach a 2-day course in the executive program here on innovation. And we spend a lot of time looking at a half a dozen different ways in which you can understand and anticipate customer needs. And we spend a fair amount of time on how do you understand the technologies that might be relevant. And that's where scouting comes in. Important, innovation is not coming up with innovative ideas. Every once in a while, I find an organization that is attempting to say, I wonder how innovative we are. Let's look at our patents. Well, patents are a measure of creativity, not necessarily of anything that people care about. You actually have to build it and sell it before you have something that's innovative. And Don Marquis saw that, because he says, after you've come up with the innovative idea, you need to select it, test it, develop it, and then get people to use it and diffuse. Not until it's used do you actually have an innovation. Now, these ideas have been floating around MIT for, 50, 60 years. Some of you may have been exposed to some of them for the first time about 20 years ago when Clay Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma and The Innovator's Solution highlighted the importance of don't give customers what they ask for, figure out what they need, which is in line with what MIT had found back in the 60s. Some of you have in your organizations have voice of the customer programs which build on that. And those are missing something. It's not enough to just know what the customer wants before you come up with an idea. You have to get smart. What are the technical options that are out there? Those of you that probably the most popular innovative framework today is design thinking. And I love design thinking because it's totally consistent with what the MIT model came up with back in the 60s. You've got 3 circles in IDEO's classic representation of design thinking. Understand what the need is, understand what the options are, and then find those that make sense for our organization. Where those intersect, you have the opportunity to be innovative. And that's basically what was in Don Marquis's model so many years ago. So where does scouting help? Well, where it most often helps, and what I have many, but it may actually be most, is they go through and they say, I think we understand what the customer needs. Let's get together and create innovative concepts for addressing those needs. We've got an answer. We're missing some pieces. We have a gap. And so they go to the tech scouts and they say, can you get us the missing pieces of something we know that we want to do? By the way, that is a role of scouts. That is an important activity. But I'll tell you what, it doesn't help you be innovative. It just helps you get things done quickly. The problem with that is you're getting information after you've made a decision of what you want to do. So you have faster development of ideas that are often terribly flawed. Innovation is not just filling gaps. That's procurement. And procurement is a good and noble profession, but it's not the source of innovation. I was doing some work a couple of years ago with one of the parts of the US government that's involved in national defense and national security. And there's an organization called In-Q-Tel, which is basically a US government-run venture capital operation that helps organizations, that helps people in the intelligence community better focus themselves on where are there opportunities for new technology. And I was sitting in Pamela's office. She was one of the organizations in the National Security Framework. And the head of In-Q-Tel was berating her. You keep giving me needs. You want information. Is anyone doing this? You want to know, is this happening? I keep giving you all these things, and you never do any deals. And then Pamela pulled out a list of successful projects that she had that only occurred because of the information that came back through that source. In one case, they discovered there wasn't anything better than they were thinking of doing, which meant the risk profile changed and was able to get funded because it was no longer seen as a possible loss. In one case, just interacting with another entrepreneurial thinking organization gave them a new way of thinking about the problem, and it was the thinking, not a product, that did it. And sometimes they learned about a new technology, but there was no patent protection on it. It was something they could do. They had just never thought about it before. What I've discovered is that when you work with another organization in that tech scouting role, it's not just about getting information. What are some of the other things you can do? Well, probably the one that I use most in the innovative work with organizations is making that inventory of technical options fuller before you come up with the ideas of how to address your customers' needs. What alternative technologies are out there? And I have an approach. So you collect information on the needs, same as before, but before you come up with the ideas, what are other people doing that's like this that may help us solve our problem? And then you generate ideas. By the way, you may end up using the technology you knew about. More often than not, there is a different approach you never thought of before. I use a thing called the analogous problem exploration that's not based, but similar to the thinking of truths. We have a problem. Who else has that problem? What are they doing? How do we adapt that to us? Let me give you a couple of quick examples. This is the IBM data card that was used to put input into computers through the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and it started dying away in the 90s. You still will get that card when you board an American Airlines plane or you get a Hertz car. And I often ask when I have a workshop in my 2-day program, does anyone know why it's that size? And the reason it's that size is back in 1890 when Hollerith came up with the idea of analyzing data with punched information on a card, he didn't want to have to invent a sorting machine. So he said, I wonder who else has a problem like this? And he discovered that banks had money counting machines. The IBM punch card is the same size as US currency in 1890. NASA. This is a spacesuit that ILC Dover makes. And I worked with ILC Dover several years ago and got some insights there. NASA said, the biggest problem we're going to have with spacesuits is where the metal connects with the fabric. Who's really good at connecting metal with fabrics, and we can learn from them? ILC Dover is the company they chose. ILC Dover is a spin-off from something called International Latex Corporation. International Latex Corporation has a consumer brand that uses their expertise in linking cloth and metal. It's called Playtex. They make bras. It was a bra company that makes million-dollar spacesuits because they had expertise in putting cloth and metal together. The bullet train in Japan, struggling with problems of sonic booms coming out of tunnels. And the guy that was in charge of designing that was a bird fancier. And he said, you know, the kingfisher is able to dive at incredible speeds and enter a different environment without creating a lot of waves. I wonder how they do it. He studied it, And the shape of the nose of that was based upon the kingfisher. Think about other people that have your problem. I just added this when I saw that the last speaker had a video, and I said, oh, I should really add a video. Can we get that?
Next scene, you're going to see a nice coral bottom. And you'd see that an octopus would stand out very easily there if you couldn't use your camouflage, use your skin to change color and texture. Here's some algae in the foreground, and an octopus. Isn't that amazing? Now, Roger spooked him, so he took off, a cloud of ink, lands, and when he lands, the octopus says, look, I've been seen, best thing to do is get as big as I can get. That big brown makes his eye spot very big. So he's bluffing. Let's do it backwards. I thought he was joking when he first showed it to me. I thought it was all graphics. So here it is in reverse. Watch the skin color. Watch the skin texture. Just an amazing animal. Can change color and texture to match the surroundings. Watch him blend right into this algae. 1, 2, 3.
What does that have to do with tech scouting? One of the companies that I've been working with that makes face creams and hand creams and other things is working with marine biologists to figure out how the octopus does it so we can apply that technology to the human situation. So what are some of the motivations for scouting? You can find alternative technologies. You can work with people that are using technology that you're interested in to find out what other things they're doing, opportunities perhaps for expansion. One of the most important uses is working with people that are technically smart. Just how do they think? How do they address the problem? What do they do? It's one of the most powerful reasons for being part of the MIT ecostructure, and that is the fact that you don't just get access to world-class technology, you get access to world-class thinking. And often it is the thinking more than the nanostructure, the thinking more than the new sort of interface device, the thinking more than the neural network that will give you the value of working with the people at MIT. But if all you're doing is looking for a new nanostructure, you're going to miss that. And you're going to miss an opportunity to really build on expertise from other places. What information on alternative technologies were felt our risk assessment? Do we know that other people are doing something better? Can we speed up the development? Can we share the development? And then maybe there's a missing piece. Think broadly about how scouting can help, and it will do much more than just fill in the gaps. This leads in, why did I spend so much time on that? When my talk is, how do you effectively work in the MIT Kendall Square ecostructure? Because once you understand what you can get out of a relationship, it starts telling you what you need to do in that relationship. If all you're coming here for is to get a technology that someone has patented, a technology that someone's doing research on, you can probably just do that through your procurement office or a contractor or a creator or something like that. But if we are trying to get into thinking, new approaches to things, expanding the way you look at the world, you need to consider more than just who has the technology. You have to consider, how do we work with them? I loved the last slide where he crossed out at MIT and put in with MIT. That is such an important insight. Let me give you 3 quick keys to success for doing that. Number 1, know why you're here. Know why you want to interact with the ecosystem here. It's not enough to just say, there's a lot of bright people, we're going to come. In the 45 years that I've consulted with organizations, I've only turned a couple of contracts down. One of them I turned down because we were going to be starting a project, and I said, okay, first step, tell me what you want to be when you grow up. What are your goals? What are you working on? What are your challenges? Oh, we have no idea what we want. That's why we want a scouting program to find out what's out there. It's not going to work. There's just too much out there. You need to go in with an idea that says, We need to improve our interface. We need to improve our response time. We need to know how to use water less. We need to know how to conserve resources. You have to have some idea of the value that you're going to get. Secondly, be sensitive to the culture. And it has two parts to that. Part number one, language is important. I was doing work with a scouting program. Well, you can figure out who it was. When I was doing the work with Shell, they had a relationship with the university in Sweden that wasn't going very well. And I said, let me examine this. And it turns out that the Shell technical person, his first language was Dutch, his second language was Flemish, his third language was German, his fourth language was English. Turns out the Swedish people he was working with, their first language was Swedish, their second language was Finnish, their third language was, they were working each other with their third and fourth languages. And I said, didn't you have anyone of these thousands of people that spoke Swedish? Yeah, but they weren't the best technical person. Think about the culture, not just the technology. But also think about the fact that the culture can have an impact on your culture. Think about that. Working with someone like MIT can change the way that you look at the world, particularly as it relates to something called collaboration. One of the first major scouting programs I set up was with Sir Harvey Jones at ICI back in the early 80s. And one of the universities we looked at was MIT. And we said, let's take a look and see what it takes to work effectively with MIT. We also looked at some other universities, and we discovered something interesting. At some of the universities, even if you had a contract with them, you had to make an appointment to talk to somebody. And you had to go through a secretary and get on someone's calendar. MIT is significantly more open. By the way, the professors here and the researchers here will take time to chat with you as long as you bring something of value. It's not because there's an appointment, it's because it's worth talking to you. I'm going to share one story with you and then we'll get into the questions. I'm 3 minutes over, I apologize. One of the most influential discussions I had with a professor back here when I was doing my doctoral work, a leader in the field, he's published dozens of books, hundreds of articles, excellent writer. He gave me one of his papers to look at. And I went to him and I said, you really want me to give you feedback? And he said, yeah, it's not very good, is it? And I said, he said, look, you have to understand something. I'm not at MIT because I write well. I write well because I'm at MIT. It is the collaboration and the interaction of fine minds that makes my work better. And so one of the things when you're looking to work with people to go beyond just getting the product is find an organization that believes in something called collaboration, of working together, of sharing ideas, of approaching the problems in different ways. Anyway, quick summary. Scouting is more than getting a product, it's getting information. Think broadly of how it can help, particularly at that front end when you're getting information on how innovation happens. And if you want to make it happen, create relationships in places where you get collaboration, where you've got a sharing of minds. You've got people coming together to think differently and expose you to new ideas. That's where you get the value that promotes innovation. I hope this has been helpful, and I'm open for questions. Oh, okay.
What are the common pitfalls that cause tech scouting programs to fail at companies?
That's not one I anticipated, but it's one I have heard a lot. You know, I should have mentioned that. I think probably the biggest problem is relying on your experts to determine whether something is of value. People say, what do you mean on that? I look at some of the programs that I worked with and say, ooh, MIT's developing this new surface coating that's going to be able to do such. And the person that is inside your organization that's involved in coding said, we can do it. We can do it better. I had a friend, Bob Mass, that I worked with years ago, and he was a tech scout at Sohio before it got picked up by BP. And I remember he came into his lab one time, and he had found this really amazing technology that could help him. And he said, look at this. And the people said, that's interesting, but we could do it better. And then he came up with the answer. Yeah, but you're not doing it, they are. Get past the point of talking about we could and we are. The second thing is, everyone thinks that not invented here is a barrier to innovation. It is at the organizational level. But at the individual scientist and engineering level, you want that. You want someone to say, I can do it. I can do anything. And the problem with that, or the good part of that, work by Ralph Cates and Tom Allen have shown that zeal that says, I can do anything, is critical to innovation. But that I can do anything also means if something new comes along, I can do it. So when I set up scouting programs, I try to get input from the technical experts, but I don't let them make the decision. If you let your technical experts make the decisions, you're going to miss a lot of new things. That's probably the single biggest problem that I found.
You provided us also with a question that I thought was very interesting. If you don't measure a scouting program by deals, how do you measure its performance?
People love hard metrics. And they love the ability to say, I did 23 deals, I did 14 deals, I have 2 alliances. Those are easy to measure and often totally irrelevant. What happens if you go out and you spend a lot of money and you have a relationship and you discover you don't need that deal? But to get rewarded, you do that deal. And now you've involved someone sharing the resources, maybe slowing things down in some areas that you didn't need to do. So I say, what you need to do is to find the measure that actually has to do with the impact you're trying to do. So you don't measure by deals, you measure by impact. And what do we mean by impact? One of the more interesting programs I set up was several years ago with a competitor of Procter & Gamble. Why did they want a scouting program? Whenever they would find a university professor doing something really interesting that they could use in their business, he'd already talked to Procter & Gamble. Whenever they found an entrepreneurial company that they wanted to work with, they'd already talked to Procter & Gamble. They wanted to create an information flow that people would know about them and they would know about people before Procter. How did they measure their success? How many people did we talk to in the last year that hadn't talked to Procter first? It was a very simple metric. Ones that I more often use, because that's a very specific case, is surprises. How many surprises have you had in the last 2 years? Innovative introductions. What is going on with your rate of introducing new products and services? So you're looking at output metrics, not input metrics. Input metrics are, we did this deal. Output metrics is, we weren't surprised. We got there first. We talked to them first. We are the people that are pushing the direction of that technology. So focus on output and not input. The problem with output metrics too often is there's a long time gap between the activity and knowing what the output is, and they're subjective. And if you're in an organization that has to have a hard number, it's hard to do scouting well. What you want to do is push them to be thinking more openly about what does it mean to add value.
That's good. Jay, thank you so much.
Thank you.